All right, so thank you everyone for coming to the Emerging Media Lab's Summer Showcase. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sloan Madden. I am the lab coordinator here at the Emerging Media Lab, and I have the great honor of being your Masters of Ceremonies this evening. So we would just like to open this by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations. Our event will also be broadcast via live stream. We would like to acknowledge that the people who are joining us online are joining us from a variety of places, and we would like you to take a moment to reflect on who are the rightful owners of this land. Thank you. Now, we have tonight our wonderful agenda. So we will have a brief series of introductory remarks by Jennifer Burns, UBC's wonderful CIO and longtime Emerging Media Lab collaborator. We will then go through the project presentations of our amazing students who have done so much work over the past 4 months. We will then have a panel discussion moderated by Dr. Patrick Pennefather that involves discussing the Emerging Media Lab, the project process, and the individual projects we have worked on over the summer and the projects we will be working on into the fall. And that will be with the project PIs. We will then have the opportunity to go into a demo session. So you guys will get the chance to try out all of the amazing projects that you will see being discussed today. Before we begin, I would just like to invite the people in the back. If you see any seats in the front that you would like to fill, please move forward because there are some gaps, and we want to make sure that everyone can see the wonderful presentations as clearly as possible. Awesome. So it is now my pleasure to pass the podium to Jennifer Burns, UBC's Chief Information Officer, longtime EML collaborator, and we are so thankful that she has taken the time to come here to talk about us.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be able to come here to these showcases and see the work of the faculty and the students and what you've achieved over the months since the last showcase. One of the important things about the EML is the ability for creating a space for faculty and staff and students to come together to explore, collaborate, and learn together, particularly in the area of new technologies that UBC is just beginning to envision how it may support, enable, and empower its strategic objectives. The EML is not the only such space that we have. We're also privileged to have the Cloud Innovation Center that does similar work and supports students. We also have other areas within CTLT that do that. And in IT, we're also now beginning to look at spinning up what we're calling the Digital Experience Lab. Very similar model, very similar construct, but focused around operational technologies in the administrative space. All of these centers are extremely important for providing that space, the freedom to fail, if you will, although obviously we also look for the freedom to succeed, but to be able to provide a foundation for us to build from and to put into production things that we learn. I recently had an opportunity to meet with some of the faculty, and they shared with me some of the creations that happened years and years ago through similar kinds of skunkworks that were still in operation today. And so it really brought home for me these seeds that we sow in the Emerging Media Lab have really long-lasting opportunities to bear fruit and bring forward. And I will tell you, it also I think, centered for me my responsibility as the Chief Information Officer to continue to ensure places like the EML can thrive, that we find ways, even in the financial times that we all experience, that we continue to fund, resource, and support and sustain these areas. I do have to thank our faculty for their support and bringing their projects forward into the Emerging Media Lab. Thank the students for spending their time and supporting us in building these new tools and adding their creativity. And of course the staff that also support us in the work that they do every day. And one of the recent success stories, of course, that we have is is with Dr. Patrick Pennefather, as a faculty member in residence at the EML, and was recognized through the 2023 CUCCIO Awards, which is the Canadian University Council of CIOs. So all the CIOs across Canada get together and we vote on what we think is really a truly innovative practice. And that was recognized through that award. And it's really become, his course has now become a national model for academic integration and demonstrating the use of technology. Of course, technology is not here as a purpose in of itself. Technology is here to support and enable the work that we do at UBC, which is about knowledge translation and knowledge creation. And when our students go out into the world beyond UBC, they will take their knowledge and their experimentation into their future careers. And they will learn how to help the organizations that they are part of, and maybe some of them will even stay at UBC or go on and do deeper learning. And that will serve them into their future. So for me, the EML is just the start of our story. This is the beginning of our journey, and in using technology creatively, and especially in an age where responsible AI is so critical. And so the things that we're doing in the EML, both around augmented and virtual reality and new forms of media, and then incorporating AI into that, hopefully it's also providing that grounding of how to do that as part of the user journey, the user experience, and doing that responsibly. So for me, a hugely important part of UBC's strategy, an important part of the way I think about technology as the CIO. And I'm so grateful for all of you coming here today to see the things that our students and staff and faculty are working on. And I hope you'll think a little bit about how this application that you're seeing here can be expanded and looked at and used to change even what we're doing today at UBC. So thanks everyone for being here. I hope you have a chance to stick around and see what the students have done, and I look forward to seeing more. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Before we begin, I would like to give you just a brief overview of the various projects we will be discussing today. First, we will hear from Dr. Siobhan McPhee and her GRIP project team and hear about their AI chatbot, Ocelia. Ocelia is an artificial intelligence unit that aims to provide a place for students to expand their learning and enrich class discussions, specifically for first-year students within geography. We will then hear from the Headspin team, led by Dr. Manu Madhav and his additional investigators, which looks at how virtual reality can study the link between cognition, navigation, and orientation. Last but not least, we will hear from Ray Clark and his team involving the Procedural Poetry Funhouse, which aims to use virtual reality and 3D space to explore concrete poetry and the creative process behind making a poem. So, before we move on to Ocelia, I would just like to explain how this is going to go. After each presentation, there will be a brief period where you guys can ask questions to the project teams, provide comments, things like that. But if you don't get the chance to ask your question before we have to move on to the next presentation, there will also be a chance during the demo session to talk to the teams, talk to them about their process, the projects they've created, and the actual technology and iterative work that went into these varied and amazing projects. So, without further ado, I will pass the mic off to Dr. Siobhan McPhee to talk more about Ocelia.
Thank you. Welcome. So Ocelia's kind of been, I've been at UBC 11 years now. It's a shock when I think of that, but thanks, Patrick. I made it. And I've seen in those years different levels of teaching, but always teaching first years. And in geography, as in with a lot of the social sciences and humanities courses, we ask our students to read dense academic articles, policy papers, and then come and give their critical thoughts on that. And that's a big jump from high school. And I've also taught a lot of international students in the course of those years. So I started by annotating PDFs, just like, okay, jargon language. And that was like, students were like, oh, that was actually really helpful, thank you. Then I went to my discussion class and I didn't feel completely lost. But then as I started to play around with AI, I'm like, what, I don't want it to summarize, but what if it could ask students questions to get them to dig deeper into the article, to get them excited about it, to relate it to some of the lecture concepts or the weekly concepts that we're grappling with, and then still to go to the discussion classes, because these are really key for peer, collaboration and confidence building, but with a bit more confidence in that they, even if they don't read the article, which, life gets busy. Oh, of course, yeah. But even something that really astounded me was the ability to skim, which, you do, we all do it. But first-year students, that's a skill that they really have to learn. They're reading every word. That's time-consuming, to Patrick's point, that we all read the articles. So even that ability to engage with AI in a way that would allow them to develop even that skill, to skim, to ask the critical questions, to pick out the key words, and then, of course, to relate it to the weekly theme or concept that we're discussing. So I brought this to EML, and it's been an incredible summer working with Marianne and Walker, and we have a great prototype that I'm proud to say has made it through the first round of the large TLEF. The letter of intent was successful. So the next thing is I got to do the application, looking at Jeff. And that's a big part of that is thanks to EML and, of course, the work of the students. So I'm going to hand over to Marianne Walker to show you what Auxilia does.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Marianne. I'm the project lead and UI UX designer for this project. And this is Walker, who worked on the development for the project. So this project aims to address a key problem. In online courses, students often struggle to engage with course readings and connect with the content. However, in these online settings, it is incredibly important for students to do just that. With this in mind, we wanted to develop an AI assistant that draws from a course's assigned readings while discussing them one at a time. Some of our goals were to create AI behavior that encourages discussion and learning through conversation, and to improve the experience of completing and understanding these course readings. This project was specifically designed for direct use in a first-year geography course, which would be delivered online. But we believe that this approach innovates how students could engage with their courses in the future. It aims to offer greater flexibility, accessibility, foster deeper understanding, and enhance student participation. An important stage of this project was to research our target audience with a question in mind. How might we improve student motivation and engagement with course readings through a text interaction? Through user interviews, we gained insights like students having difficulty pinpointing key takeaways from readings, information overwhelm, as well as the importance of discussion and specifically hearing concepts from different perspectives. We use these insights to create personas and user flows in order to help us make intentional decisions with regards to the conversational and interface design. So we created a mock-up of what this might look like in the future, with the ability to switch between weekly topics, view privacy information, and include conversation aids to help the students' interactions. Now, instead of digesting walls of text, Auxilia offers a new way to flexibly discuss individual weekly readings in a dynamic way. And now I'll pass it on to Walker to take you through a bit of the development process.
Thank you so much, Marianne. So Auxilia is a little bit interesting. Auxilia is a lot like ChatGPT with a bit of a twist on it. We kind of operate within a weekly context. Most ChatGPT sessions, you kind of just talk about whatever. We actually have a specific context that you have to choose. The user actually chooses. So if you're reading on, week 2, you would actually select a week 2 section, and it would discuss the readings of that week. So the main sections of the actual chatbot, pretty similar to what you already know. We have this kind of message log that is a representation of the exchange between the user and the agent, and then we have the current focus down here. So I'll kind of show you this flow here. So we implemented the AI behavior using this flow chart. You don't really need to see this. This is a lot of abstract state here. But we pretty much tried to get it so when a user asks a question, when they ask a question related to the reading, the AI will interpret that, it will try to break it down, and it'll try to ask a probing question, trying to tie what they asked back to the reading. So the AI is not giving them an answer. It's not summarizing things. It's asking them a question. That's a very big key component there. So for interface development, we used Blazor. Blazor is a framework. It's provided by Microsoft. It's time-tested. It's very, very fast. We use something called client-side interactive WebAssembly. You don't need to know what that means. It pretty much just means the application runs on your browser natively. It's very, very fast, so there's no delays or anything like that. I've got a little bit of a video to show you guys here. And I made a mistake during development. It's kind of funny. But there's an Easter egg somewhere in this video. And 2 of our most eagle-eyed employees, they caught that, actually. So I'm going to see if you guys can. There we go. So the user will initially load into this thing, and it will send a message saying, hello, I'm a new student. The AI will respond with this message here, and it'll try to gauge the user's understanding. The user will have to respond with either very familiar, somewhat familiar, and not familiar at all regarding the course material. If they say something unrelated to the answer, the AI will ask again. So the user can ask a question, please provide me a general outline of the first week's reading. It'll give a summary of the actual reading, pretty much it. If the user actually asks a question related to the place for space or the reading content, it will try to ask probing questions. So yeah, to get a clear understanding, it'll try to say, how does place incorporate into space? You can select the weeks here, and then this is pretty much just the UI. So another big concern for Auxilia is information. When you send your information to the AI, is it secure? Technically, we use OpenAI for all of our services. We don't use anything natively. So this means that your information is sent somewhere, but it is secure. It has to be secure. We pay for it to be secure. That's the whole point of the paid model by OpenAI. And then we also use the embeddings for OpenAI. I'll kind of cover what embeddings are in a second here. But when we upload the knowledge base, when we upload the actual readings for the course, the AI needs to be able to interpret those. And the way we get it to interpret those is we upload it directly to the same place we pull the LLM from. And what that means is we kind of put them all in the same place, so the AI itself and the course readings are all together. So we can kind of pull together. Yeah. And that's about it for Auxilia. If you guys have any questions, I'd love to hear them. Thank you for your time. So that's a really good question. So the current way we use our embeddings is we upload them into OpenAI. So OpenAI handles everything on that side. If there's a new innovation in terms of like interpreting a graphic or interpreting text and representing that in a structured format, like there is embeddings, which is pretty much what we use for our text, and then there's a new kind of technology called knowledge graphs. A knowledge graph basically lets you represent a node, like you could say Queen Elizabeth I, that's some name. And then you could have some arrow, and you would say Queen of England, right? And that's some relationship there. So when it's pulling these images, it's pulling these pretty much diagrams, it tries to build a contextualized representation in a textual format so that the actual user's query can be mapped to that representation, and we can pull it back, all in text. So it really depends on the back end, but it changes. That's a big thing we have. So when new innovations come out, we will use them automatically, because we don't handle that. Yes? So we did not implement that so far right now. We currently have the chatbot as a single session. When you start the chatbot, you represent one single conversation. It is not saved anywhere. We have no, the data is all transient. We have no storage whatsoever. Everything you say, completely safe. And because of that, we didn't build the infrastructure to save the text. We didn't see that that was an immediate priority. We just wanted to get the demo done. So in the future, yeah, we would be giving them a
Yeah, it's to also bring in more courses, obviously, within the faculty, but also absolutely to explore the possibility of this being something that students can refer, like they're in a fourth year course, they would be able to refer back. But we're still in early conversations because there's a whole lot of cost factors and storage and all of that. But yeah, hopefully, because it is nice to be able to go back and see how your critical engagement with this has changed over time. Yeah.
To what degree yet have you been able to try this out with students and get the feedback as to their experience with learning?
Sure, no problem. Yeah. I'm technically on sabbatical this term, so I'm not really here. But yeah, I'm teaching 121 in January, and it's an online asynchronous course with synchronous discussion sections. So even more important to have something like Ocelia that then students can come to the discussion classes, and because of course with asynchronous there's a lot of that lack of personal connection. So I'm hoping to have some results by the time, yeah. But definitely I would say for the students in EML who tried it out and for all the community here, we've had good feedback so far. And Patrick tried to break it and couldn't, so that I took that as a huge compliment as well.
All right, thank you to Marianne, Walker, and Shaban. If you guys have any other questions about Ocelia, please feel free to ask them during the demo session. I'm sure Walker would be very happy to talk to you about it. All right, next up is the Headspin project, and I will call to the stage the Headspin student team and Dr. Manu Madhav.
Hi everyone, my name is Manu Madhav and I'm representing the Headspin team here, Victoria, Graydon, and Jerry. And I'm a faculty member in the School of Biomedical Engineering and a faculty of residence at EML. And I work with, on the faculty side, we have two other members of this team. One is John Sebastian Blon, who's sitting there, who's in the Faculty of Kinesiology, and Calvin Kuo, who's also in Biomedical Engineering. And my lab is interested in navigation, how we find our way around the world. John Sebastian is interested in multisensory integration and the vestibular system, and Calvin is interested in wearable sensing. And so when we put all of our heads together, this is the fever dream that came out, which we call Headspin. And the idea here is to figure out a way in which we can determine how humans integrate their sense of orientation. So we have a sense of orientation. We know where up is, we know how much we've rotated, but we do that by sensing multiple different modalities together. So we use our vestibular system, our inner ear, but we also use our vision, we use our hearing. All of those senses come together in some way to tell us how we are oriented or how an object that we are seeing is oriented. And the question is, could we use new technologies and emerging media in order to very precisely quantify how much of these different senses are being used and to perturb them in a specific way so as to model them. So the challenge that we put to this team was to create a virtual reality interface where you can create rotations of objects and then have the user be able to put the object back into the original orientation so that when we actually do this experiment, and we want to do this experiment with human participants, we can introduce perturbations. And these perturbations include, John Sebastian's lab has this rotating chair that participants can sit in and do this task in. There is a vestibular stimulation that we can provide behind the ear so that your inner ear is a little bit confused as to the orientation. And craziest of all, there is this giant robotic arm that is being installed into the basement of the new biomedical engineering building. And in the best case scenario, we want to strap humans to this robotic arm and rotate them around while they're wearing this VR and doing this task. Hopefully it all comes together. Thank you.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Victoria and I'm the project lead and UX UI designer on the project.
Hi, I'm Jerry. I'm one of the developers on the project.
And I'm Graydon. I'm another developer on the project.
Okay, so Manu has already given us a great overview into what exactly this project is about, but I'll like to give you an overview into the interface that we developed for this project. So essentially we used Unreal Engine to create an interface which includes 3 components. So a setup UI, which allows the researcher to input participant ID, select a trial file, and choose controls. We also included a tutorial, which allows them to get a sense of how the task actually, that they have to do actually works. So yeah, the task itself is a little complex, but I'll try to break it down. Essentially, within a task, you have multiple trials. And as mentioned, in phase 1 of the trial, it could be either passive or active. If it is a passive rotation, you would just watch the object rotate. If it's active, you would also repeat that rotation. Either way, once you get to phase 2, you will rotate the object back to its initial orientation. And in the future, as Manu mentioned, phase 2 will incorporate disturbances like a rotational chair, galvanic vestibular stimulation, and the robotic arm and more.
Yeah, so I'll begin talking a bit about what work went on in the development side. So we implemented user interfaces for the researcher to configure experiment settings and fill in participant data. And additionally, there is separate UIs for changing network configurations for sending information containing experiment data for our future devices to be integrated, which will include track data and phase states. Game managers were also designed for the tutorial and the experiment for handling logic relating to the status of the game and to read and load data from our data banks containing the experiment patterns. UI switching logic is also dependent on these managers, and the functions for writing and converting these formats, file formats, and object rotations are utilized here. For the virtual reality experience, we used a laser pointer to trigger interactive clicks on the UIs, and we set up the controller grip to apply rotations to the given objects. Participant position and controller world data are also being tracked here.
So there's a few other things that we had to develop on the development side of the project. So the first thing is, when we were modeling the environment that the user is actually going to interact with, we wanted to keep it very plain, and that's just sort of so that they don't have a bias towards which way they're facing or anything like that. We also developed a rotation system that basically allows a researcher to basically script how an object will rotate over time, and then put that inside of a nice JSON file, and then it will simulate that during each trial. We also have a compression system for storing trial data. So as you can imagine, the researchers might want to write specific data from our project into a file that they can later look at. And so we didn't want that to take up too much space on the computer. So what we actually did was we implemented basically a compression system which would write the values and their direct bits directly into a file instead of writing like characters, for instance. We also implemented a UDP packet system, and basically what that means is we're sending these packets which contain data about our trials and like basically what's happening inside of the game state like in real time, so that like the different apparatuses that Victoria and Manu mentioned, like the vestibular galvanic stimulation, those things can be activated using the data that we're sending effectively.
And on the design side of things, at the start of the project, we focused mostly on user research. As mentioned, this is going to be a research study, so many participants who will be using this tool will come from different backgrounds. So we sought to understand the needs and pain points of different target users. So here we have a target user persona of an undergraduate student. And yeah, it was through this that we were able to ascertain certain goals and needs and pain points of the student. We also created story maps and user flows in order to map out the task scenario within the interface, and user flows underwent several iterations throughout the project as we sought to understand how well the task will be communicated to the user. Midway through, we also conducted a user testing initiative, which was really useful in gathering feedback on the current prototype, and as well for both Figma and the Unreal prototype, and to determine usability of the controls and the user's understanding of task. This initiative provided valuable feedback, which led to changes in how the task structure was communicated to the user, and as well as the controls that the user would use to rotate the object. Other than user research, we also focused on designing the prototype in Figma. So yeah, you can see a prototype of the tutorial on the left and the prototype of the task on the right. And to justify design rationale and to provide consistency for future development, we also created a style guide which detailed the components of the design system and rationale behind that, from controller schematics to buttons throughout the project.
So moving forward, the future considerations for the project include incorporating quality of life improvements like error and controller tooltip indicators, as well as further iteration on the controls for ergonomic support across the board for all users. And of course, integration with the system to be able to carry out phase 2 of the research, which will include the disturbances like the rotational chair, robotic arm, the GVS, and more.
And now we have a demo video of our current interface so you can see what it looks like for yourself. Yep, so we start off here with our researcher UI, and they're able to set up the study as well. And here we have a tutorial overview. This was created in Figma, but essentially it takes the user through all the steps of what an actual task simulation would look like, so they are accustomed to the controls and using it, and are familiar with the task that they have to create, or I'm sorry, to perform. Yeah, and also phase 2 of the project as well for future iterations. And yeah, once the tutorial is complete, they are taken to the task itself. So here we have a trial which is passive for phase 1. So all they have to do is just watch the object rotate, yay, and complete once they've watched the rotation. And now they will move the object back to its initial orientation in phase 2. In an active trial, they have 2 objects there. So you will watch the rotation on one. Yep, and you will replicate that rotation on the other. And same for phase 2, you will repeat that initial, rotate that object back to its initial orientation. And it just keeps going, so throughout the multiple trials in the study, however many the researcher would like to implement, yeah. And once we're finally done, maybe not yet, but yeah, you'll see a complete screen there. Thank you so much for listening. Yes.
Do I want a mic, Saeed, or can I just talk loud? You don't get a question, but it's a long question. All right, then pass the mic. No, I'm lazy. Okay, so when I went to China Joy in Shanghai, I went on a ride that I lovingly called the barf chair. And Manu and I have some discussions to have about the barf chair. I lasted 11 seconds. And the chair rotated and it moved. But on top of that, even when it was still, the experience was a Ferris wheel. So imagine you're on a Ferris wheel. Okay, do your best to not get sick if you already are feeling that. And the horizon moved. Whoops. So I'm wondering, because you didn't have in future steps the idea of stability. So where is that core stability going to come from? And I'm referring a lot to Jason Gerald in the VR book on, and I know, Jerry, you know the book. But essentially the entire chapter on sickness in VR and the vestibular system. So I'm just wondering, in terms of scaling this, not just the UX of a person using it, a participant, pardon me, but also the developers developing this stuff. Like, were you thinking about that too? I'm just curious, because how am I going to not get sick going in and out of VR actually testing this? So I just wanted to challenge you guys with that. See what your thoughts are. Curious.
Yeah, so the first thing that would come to my mind when dealing with this topic of how are we primarily dealing with motion sickness, especially when we're working with a project where we're applying very extreme disturbances to a person, like strapping them to a robotic arm. The first thing that comes to my mind is, yeah. The first thing that comes to my mind would be we could first improve on our tutorial section of this experiment. So we could first begin with like an acclimation period for them to first get used to the disturbances that will be applied to them. They could be of varying different degrees of extremeness, and we can slowly acclimate them up to the point that we want to begin testing them on. And this could also serve as a good way for us to evaluate whether or not this individual is suitable for this experiment in the first place. Because there are some people that they have really, really terrible motion sickness, and there's not much we can do about that. But yeah, definitely, I think at the beginning of the experiment, we could improve on the tutorial and add in an acclimation period. Any other questions?
I understand the desire at the beginning to have a controlled environment, fixed space, white background, no distractions. Did you export using pass-through so that you see the current environment and then engage the object?
Yeah, sure. So I think the idea to use pass-through, it might be a good idea for just like rotating objects in 3D space, just because like you guys were saying, there's issues with the person's orientation and the horizon and whatnot. But I think it also somewhat defeats the purpose of the experiment simply because we're doing these different things, like we're disturbing like their ability to balance themselves, we're putting them in like a rotating chair, all those sorts of things. And basically we're assessing how are they trying to like rotate this object back, and we're trying to assess like what cues they're using, right? And if we're letting them see the environment around them, I think it sort of defeats that.
I can also add on to that. So the really, really great part about doing psychology experiments using virtual reality is the fact that it allows for us to control a lot of different variables. Because if we use pass-through, for example, if you're using like a normal experimental room like this, for example, things in your environment will change. This chair might get moved a few meters away. That table might not be there anymore. Depending on if you have windows in your room, there are different levels of sunlight that might be in the room. But because we're working with an entirely virtual reality environment, we get to control everything that's in the environment. And so we could create a stable environment across all participants.
That was a great answer, by the way. I have nothing to add to that. I just wanted to clarify something, which is that in any of the disturbances that we are talking about, we are never whipping participants around, right? Like it's all very stable or very slow, under your perceptual threshold type of movements, so that you don't realize you're being moved, but your brain does still compensate for that, and we should be able to read that out in their responses.
All right, thank you to the Headspin team. If people have any other questions, they can ask it during the demo session. Ironically, it wasn't the Headspin one we had nausea issues with. It was our next project. So thank you to the Headspin team, and thank you to Manu for that wonderful presentation. Finally, last but not least, I'll turn the stage to the Procedural Poetry Funhouse team and one of their investigators, Ray Clark.
Hello, I'm Ray Clark. I'm here representing a team from Creative Writing. This consists of myself, Austin Osworth, Jen Moss, and Bronwyn Tate. Three of us, myself, Austin, and Jen, are interested in, we teach creative writing for new media. And Bronwyn, who just arrived actually, is our resident poetry specialist. We had an interest in finding out how we could teach topics like concrete poetry and procedural poetry using new techniques, and how we could potentially integrate things like virtual reality into the classroom. To that end, we came up with the concept for a procedural poetry funhouse, a virtual reality space in which the user would be able to explore and play with poetry in ways that you wouldn't be able to do in a physical medium, in a real-world space. We posed quite an interesting challenge to the team, and they took it up very ably and produced a wonderful result. I'll leave it to them to explain how this procedural poetry funhouse works.
Hello again. I'll be introducing this project, Poetry Funhouse, but first I'd also like to introduce the team that worked on this. So here we have designers, including myself, Samia, and Jiho, as well as the developers, Walker, James, and Julian. So I first want to define what concrete poetry is. In concrete poetry, meaning is not only conveyed by the words themselves, but by the shapes, symbols, and form that they create. This summer, we tackled the objective of developing a virtual reality experience that would allow users to engage with concrete poetry through play and enhance their understanding of it. The inspirations for this project were drawn from Vancouver's vibrant poetry scene in the 1960s and 70s. Ultimately, we developed the Procedural Poetry Funhouse, which is a gamified VR environment that provides a new way to inspire, compose, and experience poetry. So, let's dive into the experience, starting with Samia.
Well, let's start with user onboarding. Okay. So the first step in user onboarding is being introduced to the project background and the artistic inspirations. Let's talk about the artistic inspirations that we used. So during the 1960s and the 70s, Vancouver had a vibrant scene for both procedural and whimsical concrete poetry, particularly in neighborhoods like Kitsilano. There were communities where artists, writers, poets all created and lived together. And one such place they lived was on top of the Arbutus grocery store, which is now a coffee shop. You'll see later in the project. And one such poet who lived there was Judith Capthorne, who became a pioneer in concrete poetry. She was one of the main inspirations for this project. Her work captures the essence of how words can transcend their traditional form to be art. And in this funhouse, we aim to create that same spirit of experimentation and creativity to life. So how to play is pretty straightforward. You have 2 joysticks. You can push the right joystick forward, aim and release to teleport, and you can use the left joystick to control your direction. So we have also, to ensure a smooth experience, we have incorporated a persistent radio guide that provides instructions throughout the journey. The radio acts as a companion and guiding users on how to interact with the devices and objects around them and navigate through the experience. So moving on.
So I'll be talking about the neighborhood we made. So as the designers in front of us mentioned, the neighborhood is based around the Kitsilano neighborhood with the center focus on the Arbutus Cafe, which is also the grocery store. Of course, this was an intentional design choice, as Arbutus building was like a historical hotspot for many influential Vancouver poets back in the 60s and 70s. And of course, we wanted to really allow the users to connect to the history by introducing them to the Kitsilano neighborhood and guiding them towards our fun house, which is the Arbutus Cafe. And like as the users are able to explore and are guided towards the funhouse, we've basically created these fun street design tutorials, which will basically allow the players to learn the controls and the tools they'll be using as they're navigating through the VR experience. And then this is the inside of the Arbutus Cafe. So once they're inside, we really wanted the lobby space to really have this fun and whimsical vibe. So we really played around the concept of time and space by making the inside a lot larger than it looks from the outside, as well as introducing a coexistence of the old grocery store and the new cafe on each opposite sides. So here the users are also able to walk around and have a very fun immersive experience before they extend the stairs to begin their next part of the VR experience, which is the word maze hunt.
Yeah, so the word maze hunt is kind of paying homage more to the artists who really innovated in the concrete poetry world and kind of replicates what I would imagine their apartment would look like. And a little chaotic, things everywhere. And a big part that we wanted to focus on was the replayability and especially the randomness that procedural poetry plays. And especially creating procedurally generated mazes so that each experience that the user has is different from the previous, and that the poems that they create are from different inspirations. So they're looking for a staircase in all the mazes, and there's a beginning, which is right by the Play Me, and they have to go find the stairs, which you'll see in a moment. So here's the top view, and you'll see where we generate the staircase that the exit is. Changes every time we play the level, and where the user starts will always be there, and they have to find their way around the maze and collect words. So this is more of what on the left will be more of what the player sees, and we added some walls just to make it more clear that they're in a maze. So last part was we wanted to add even more of the randomness and kind of procedural elements to creating the poetry. So depending on which door you would go through in the lobby, we would add a different aesthetic to the room or the maze that they're in, so that the poem that they create is influenced by the environment that they're in. So now I'll let James tell you about how you collect words.
Yes, thank you, Julian. So the main game mechanic of this maze hunt room is basically to collect words. So the same as the maze generation, which prioritizes replayability, we created the system where the words are spawned randomly in terms of styling and content. Once the player is satisfied on the set of words that they have, they can traverse and complete the maze and go to the studio, which is the poetry creation space. So in this space, we provided tools for the users to create their own poems, such as the tutorial radio, the common word shelf, and a music box to actually gather inspiration as they create the maze. And now I will give it to Walker to actually discuss how to build the poem.
Thank you, James. So we've reached what Julian would call the meat and cheese of the operation. This is where you actually build the poem. So you would take the words that you collected in the maze, and you would put them together in 3D space to try and create these representations of whatever you're trying to say. We do something pretty cool here. We pretty much take the relative distance of the words, and we send them off to an AI agent. That agent will try to decipher relative meaning from your poem, and it will try to spit back a color representative of what you were talking about. So we have a little bit of a demo here from start to finish, and I'll kind of give you a walkthrough of what the whole process would look like. So the user spawns in, and they're in this tutorial section. As you'll see here, the user will progress through this street, and they will slowly complete the tasks presented to them here. If they don't complete the task, they can't move on. So once they reach the beginning of the Arbutus Grocery House, they have to complete this little puzzle so we can get them used to picking up and moving words, so they actually know how to build a poem. This is something we repeat somewhat often through the experiment. Through our tests, we found that users very often forgot their controls, so we try to continuously remind them. Users take into the lobby, and they can go up to these Monsters, Inc. doors and go to whatever maze they choose.
Welcome back, folks. We're in the heart of these vibrant poets' world. In this maze of memories, your task is to navigate through the passages, collect the word blocks, and find the spiral staircase
Julian
that leads you to the next part of your journey.
Bit of a tutorial
Tap
here
the left
in the
or right
maze.
trigger buttons to collect word blocks as you make your way out. Once you have collected words, you can see them by holding X. See you soon, folks.
So once you reach the staircase, this will take you to the studio where you can build the poem. This is our studio. And then you can go through your little word wheel and you can select whatever words you want. This is a good one. It gets better. We also provide a common word shelf. If you're trying to build a poem and you're trying to use these words that you're collecting in a maze, you may not have what you want, so we try to give the player what they might want. So this is the space changing to green because of the minty nostril. And we also provide a little bit of a music experience in here. right, questions? Yes.
Thank you. How do you go about like the maze aspect of like playing with the like discovery part of the game, but like not to the extent that they just get bored and like leave the game?
That is a very, very good question. So we were testing out the maze with a couple of our users, and one thing we found was intentionality played a big role. When you're in this maze and you're picking up these words, you see these words, you don't really think about what they say, you just collect them, and you can use them later. We toyed around with the idea of having the words face the user when they actually approach them, so there's a bit of intentionality. So when you read the word, you'd want to select it, and when you actually play that, it's a little bit more cognitive load, you do a bit more thinking, and that boredom kind of takes a step back. You kind of just get into the actual experience. And that kind of, I found that that was a very big thing, but we did not get around to implementing that. But that was a very good question. Thank you.
So I have a second one. So I took a creative writing class before, and there's like 200 students in the class. So how are you guys going to go about implementing in the class scene? Because I'm so excited by seeing this video. I can imagine all my classmates would be as well. So how are you going to go about having like VR sets where students can, is it going to be a homework project or a demo class? Like
Absolutely no idea. So this would probably be something we'd need to expand on in the later stages of the project.
Ideas that we've had, I think Jen, who's in the back here, might be able to speak more to this, but we thought about ideas such as in smaller groups, having students go to the lab to demo this, or potentially using this as an installation in a fixed location where people could come, not necessarily just students, but anyone interested in poetry could come to experiment with this.
I was also wondering about the words that are being presented. Is there an option to have a theme, like someone who's thinking of, starting with a poem, or, have them select a concept? Is that something you were thinking about?
So another absolutely fantastic question. We also toyed around with that idea. We were originally pulling our words from the Gutenberg Corpora, which is like a selection of openly available texts that we can kind of peruse and pull words from. So what we did is we basically created like an occurrency chart where we took the number of occurrences of each word, and we took that list of words and we used that as the common shelf words. And depending on the corpus that we were pulling from, like we could pull from Moby Dick, we could pull from Shakespeare, we could pull from all this stuff. Depending on what you pulled from, the common words would kind of set a theme. So when we were using Moby Dick for the common words, we got a lot of like Ahab and whale and harpoon and like very, very sea themed and stuff. So we kind of did toy around with the idea of getting the user to upload their own corpora, and then we would try to pull the common words from that. But we decided to eventually settle on a set of words that is just constant. And we randomized the selection from that word into the maze, or from that set into the maze.
Two things. This reminds me of one of my favorite things in my house, which is my magnetic poetry kit. There's even one that is an insults from Shakespeare kit, which I highly recommend. The other thing is that I really love about my magnetic poetry is that it's interactive. You go and mess up somebody else's poetry, and they go mess up yours, and then you kind of build something weird and wonderful together. Is there any interactivity possible here?
Multiplayer-wise?
Either at the same time, or that you could save your poetry and then let somebody enter into it and mess around with it, as does when you go for milk.
That is a
out
really
of the fridge.
good idea. We originally toyed around with the idea of fridge magnets at the very start when we were kind of trying to figure out direction. We don't have any way to save state right now. It's currently just a transient experience. But in the future, if we wanted to expand that functionality, we totally could, yeah.
I can add that this project was also got the go-ahead for the large TLEF, so that would be the next step.
Thank you.
All right, thank you to the poetry team. All right. So, as you have seen tonight, the lab is incredibly interdisciplinary. We've worked with creative writing, geography, biomedical engineering, forestry, audiology. Essentially, name a department on campus we've probably worked with it in the past. So we would like to highlight some of the wonderful people, some of the wonderful PIs that made this possible. So we are now going to turn to our panel discussion moderated by Dr. Patrick Pennefather, and I will call him to the stage to introduce the panelists and kind of tell you more about what's happening.
Now I have to introduce? That wasn't in my script. So, hi. I'm super excited to provoke conversation with our faculty PIs today. So why don't you all come up now, rather than being introduced one at a time, just to make it less awkward, and then just have a seat here, and we will ensue in discussions. You can clap if you'd like. Now's the time. It's awesome. Really? Come on up, Jen. Apparently there's no seat for me. I get to stand, and that's going to be really awkward. Are you sure? Like, walk up to people? Okay. Anyway, I'm going to, I'm big on self-introductions rather than on introducing. So just quick introductions, what faculty you're part of, and what you had for breakfast. Okay, not the last part.
So not the faculty part, okay. I don't need to introduce myself, but I will again. My name is Manu Madhav. I'm with the School of Biomedical Engineering and Center for Brain Health with the Faculty of Applied Sciences and the Faculty of Medicine.
Yeah, once again, I'm Siobhan. I'm in the Department of Geography in the Faculty of Arts.
I'm Jen Moss from the Creative Writing Department.
I have two, so I'll use both. Jörn Detmer, I'm with Wood Science, so part of forestry. And we actually have a robot, so if you don't have yours yet, you're welcome to come by and check it out.
Doug Sladen, School of Audiology and Speech Sciences, Faculty of Medicine.
Ray Clark, and I'm from creative writing.
You get to keep this.
Okay, great. Awesome, thank you. All right, wow, so that was a process. All of you went through different processes with these amazing, talented students. And so I just wanted to ask you what you learned about that process. How different was it than the processes you're used to in terms of being creative in the case of creative writing, for example, in the case of biomedical engineering? I know there are different processes. So I was just curious if anyone wanted to start to speak to that, or I can put Jen on the spot right away. Okay, Jen, great.
Great. Okay, so our team was incredibly creative and organized and enthusiastic, so I learned to just get the hell out of the way and let them do their thing. So that was one thing that I learned. I tend to be a little bit, I go in with a lot of ideas, and I found that this process of like standing back and giving the students room to find their own way forward with the project was really rewarding, and I think you saw the results, right? Like they really came up with some cool stuff. Yeah.
Did you want to add? Oh, yes. Yes, in the creative writing, we tend to come up with a lot of ideas all at once, and we found that when we passed on a lot of those ideas to the students, they came up with ideas to follow up on that were even more inventive than the things that we had given them. So it was truly wonderful to see what they produced that way.
Awesome, thank you. Did you, Jorn, or?
I haven't started the project yet, so but I'm very excited about to get started.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, did you want to? So Manu, I'm also particularly interested in process, right? Because for a lot of engineering projects, the processes with Agile are a little bit different. Yeah. Sometimes they're fragile, sometimes they're agile fall, sometimes they're waterfall. So I'm just curious how different it was.
I don't know what fragile is, but that sounds about right. That's typically the way that I tend to operate. But I would say that the difference in process really was that in case of an EML project, you're setting clear deliverables. You're setting a clear agenda of what should be accomplished within this, relatively short time frame, as opposed to other projects where you know the sort of scientific objectives and you get to try things. Here, you do get to try things, but because you are working towards a particular goal and there's the showcase that is coming up, that really does put a focus on it, which I find to be really good, nice. And that also at the beginning of the project, you sit down and do a set of deliverables, and Frederick actually has been pretty instrumental in setting the tone for that, which is great.
Frederick, hands up there. Yay, Frederick. Awesome. Siobhan, any words? Wise
Yeah,
words for all?
In geography, we're all about process as well. So, no, I think this is my second project with EML. The first one was back in 2015 or 16. It's a while ago. So I think I went through Jen's process then of like, just stand back. But I think what is the true beauty is something I struggle with in academia is EML is a true space for collaboration and interdisciplinarity. From even listening to the students, you can tell they're coming from different backgrounds and they're bringing that. And even like the faculty and residents and that, everyone comes from a very different background. And that is a big part of the process because it's very iterative back and forth.
Great, thank you. So now I get to, I love this because now I get to ask the questions I'm always asked, which are hard. And here's the why question. Doug, are you okay with this why question? You'll eventually like me. Why VR? In terms of, and what are you thinking? And as you're thinking, then maybe you can explain a little bit about.
Sure. So my project also hasn't started. We're geared to start up this fall. I study hearing loss and how we can rehabilitate hearing loss with cochlear implants. One of the basic auditory functions that we perform is being able to find where a sound is coming from. It's called sound source localization. We want to use VR to help rehabilitate localization because we believe it's going to result in better engagement, better participation, better follow-through with recommendations. We believe that we can manipulate the sound sources and the objects better in a VR environment than we can in a real-world environment. There is a kinesthetic component of this for us. In our design, we're going to have people locate where a sound is coming from and point to it. And by going through this motion of actually finding where it's coming from, you're reinforcing that underlying model of being able to find where sounds are coming from very discrete locations.
That's great, thank you. And can you pass it to Ray because I have the same question. Yes. And by the way, we're working right now. Saeed and I and others are trying to figure out it, and in my department as well of theater and film, how might we have a VR theater environment, which could be a really cool. The Funhouse could be really great for that. So I just wanted to say that because it's been brewing, and I've been looking for more use cases than just somewhat immersive film. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, to paraphrase our colleague Austin, we wanted to give the audience, the player, superpowers with the VR to be able to do things beyond the constraints of physical reality. We've had some ideas about other rooms that might be incorporated into the Funhouse, allowing them to, for instance, physically manipulate a wall of text, or allowing them to manipulate light in coordination with words, things that might not be possible otherwise. So that's one of the appeals for us of VR.
Great. And to prepare for your procedural part, because I think, the procedural Funhouse made sense if you understand what procedural poetry is. And not that I'm asking for a definition. In fact, I asked GPT for one. And it was something like, it works in this way. It gave me a terrible metaphor. So then it said, the poet sets a series of instructions, almost like a recipe or a map, that guides the creation of the poem, as if you're in a VR garden. I kid you not, it said that. Okay, so, but this procedural poetry thing, I think that's the right, did I define that okay with the word thing?
That's a reasonable description of it,
Yeah,
yes.
thank you. Okay, so I was just, is this just like is VR and the explorations the perfect vehicle to convey procedural poetry and concrete poetry? Is that what you were thinking when you thought about this?
For us, it certainly matched very well with the concrete poetry side of it. Concrete poetry being poetry where the specific form of the poem has import. And in this case, concrete poetry would normally be written, of course, on paper. But you can create new forms of concrete poetry if you have access to a three-dimensional space. But of course, manipulating words in a three-dimensional space in the real world is quite difficult. Even on a fridge, you're still constrained to a 2D frame. So for us, that was how concrete poetry matched up with VR. And then, of course, we wanted to make it something that anyone could come into, even if they had no background in poetry. Procedural poetry offers a bit of assistance in that matter as well, because it's not about simply making the poetry completely freeform. It's about following clear steps to produce a work of art in the end. And that's something that's more approachable if you have no background in poetry. Yeah, I'll pass it over.
That's great. Yeah, thank you.
That's a great point. And that's where we can also start to introduce large language models and AI and sort of these frameworks of interaction, setting up rules for engagement in each room of the funhouse, and then sort of seeing what an LLM can do in terms of real-time calling up words in a way that is in accordance with the rules that we have set in that room. So it's lots of fun to explore both VR and AI in that space.
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie, the last team, I really did want minty nostrils to look like, to actually take
like
the shape of minty nostrils. Because I was thinking that's what that, but maybe that's a further step in development, right? Like whatever word plays are created, they're imagined as the actual concrete.
Yeah, there's potential to do something with shape. Yeah.
Shapes of, yeah, that's great. Siobhan, awesome, we get to talk about LLMs and RAGs and knowledge graphs, and Jeff Miller's here, so he's going to be happy about that too. And so this idea of affording, I'm going to say, providing an experience for students to dig deeper in a way is, because I didn't hear, I think we've had conversations about that, but I just wanted to maybe speak to that a little bit more, because isn't it enough just to read the course readings, go into discussions, and come to class?
Sure, if you want to get a C. No.
Yeah. Now you know. But I'm just curious, like, what does it solve a problem or does it expand?
No, absolutely. It's a great question, and I think all grades aside, it's if you really want to go beyond the surface level and like when you graduate and really like engage and critique the world that you're in, the job you're in, that's where the depth is needed. And that's why I said I've been really, and I say to anyone who will listen, I model how I teach on how I wish I'd been taught. I was incredibly bored through high school and most of my undergrad and grad was okay. And because I felt like I wasn't being challenged. And I feel now we have tools that will allow us to, used in the right way, of course, and this is where digital literacy and all that comes in, can really enable us to challenge our students, because most of us are teaching very large classes. So that's really hard. That's why when you go to grad school, it's a bit easier because you have much more of a one-on-one. And working with students through EML is another great example. But for the most part, unless students come to your office hour, you're never going to be able to get past that. Yeah, I did the readings, I went to the lecture, I'm fine.
Yeah. Nice, thank you. Yeah, that's great. Think of questions as well if you have them. I'm happy to moderate those if things come up in your mind as we go through this, because everyone's answering much more quickly than I had ever imagined in my 40-minute time block. Where's the person who asked the question about attention? Yeah, sorry about that. You can just wave to me when you lose attention. I ask that of my students all the time anyway, and it's working. All right, so Manu, are you ready? Here's the tough one. And this was not my question. This actually came from the student team, which is great, so you can blame them. No, but seriously, I was thinking of this as well. So I had two questions. I'll ask mine first, because I'm trying to wrap my head around the problem you're trying to solve. And I got a glimpse of that problem right? But I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more on that process, because for me, I was imagining the tests that your participants are going to go through, and I kept imagining myself becoming nauseous, as an example, right? But you're working the other way around. So working with individuals who already have vestibular dizziness, or like, give me some language and maybe help us understand a little bit about the process of how this might support someone.
Right. So we can talk about this in terms of disease, which is, you know, again, I'm in biomedical. That's the language that you typically talk in. So you can talk about diseases like, you know, people can have issues with their vestibular system and not have this ability to integrate vestibular signals properly, or they can have other sensory disorders where you're not able to integrate other sensory mechanisms into this coherent sense of the environment, right? So that can happen. But to be honest, what I'm interested in most is the basic science aspect of it. It is to understand how we are able to collect all of this information and bring it together into a coherent framework. In, you know, not with respect to a disease, not in the pathological state, but even in a healthy human, we don't understand how that exactly happens. How we prioritize certain information, how we pay attention to certain information, and when the quality of that information changes, how we like reprioritize other channels of information that are coming in. Right? That's really what we are going for.
Wow. Lots of layers.
Lots of layers.
Yeah.
But so if you want to understand the process of it, because we were talking about process, it is, you know, you take the healthy individual, whatever that may mean. Nobody's healthy, but, you know.
Okay.
But have them do this naturalistic process that we are all familiar with. We all know how objects are rotating, for example, and we know how to put them back. We just have them do this, but then you try to see how much you can perturb that, how you know, you have different perturbation channels. I think of these as in terms of blocks and arrows. That's the way that I tend to think about it because of my training. It's the system, and then you have these different knobs that you can turn. What all are the knobs available to us? And that's where technology comes in. Technology gives us these knobs to turn that gives us these axes of perturbation that we can change and then analyze what comes out of it.
Great, thank you. And I, you know, as a related sub question based on what you just said, and this can be for anyone on the panel too. I often think because, you know, some of us are down the teaching path at UBC, others are down the research path. Many of us are both. It's a Venn diagram, really, isn't it? So I'm wondering if, in your case, right, what are some of the measurements and how will that you're looking for to measure, like, and how are you going to measure those things? Because I think that, I mean, Jerry, you've been part of different research projects that are about gaze, right? And so, okay, that's something that we can actually tell where someone is looking in VR. So I'm wondering, in your case, what are some of the things that you're, or is this NDA? But so what are some of the things that you're going to want to measure? And likewise for others on this panel, like the Funhouse poetry, procedural Funhouse poetry, pardon me. But how might that turn into different types of research questions for you? And research questions are equally around teaching, so.
So I can start off and then pass it on to others. In my case, the scientific question is already there. So the measurements are on the surface pretty straightforward. So we want to measure errors. So how much errors are people making when in the normal case and when we introduce these perturbations? That's the.
Okay, so just to be clear, errors in the rotation of an object using the controller.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we can go one level deeper. That's why I instructed the team to collect all of the data. We don't want to throw any of the data away. So where the participants are looking, where, you know, what actions are they performing, how are they moving their left and right hands during this, because we do have access to the controllers, we can have access to all of the data. All of that data is being saved, you know, 60 times, 100 times a second. And the purpose of that is that now we can employ things like AI and machine learning models to analyze not just that one single measure of the error, but this entire behavioral trajectory and see if we can glean further insights from that.
Great, thank you. That's awesome. Anyone else jump in for the mic?
Since you brought it, like the Venn diagram and the overlap between teaching and research, I think when I think about Ocelia, but technology in general, I think the beauty of it is in the way that as societies we've accepted that people learn differently, they navigate the world in different ways. I think if we leverage these tools, we have the ability, you know, people are exploring individualized medicine using, you know, technology and that. So can we, in a way, leverage it to provide students with a sense that their way of approaching things is not weird, that it's just their way, but that it brings them back together. So it's that, as when you asked me earlier about, it's about the not getting lost in the crowd. It's being able to kind of navigate your own journey. And I think for me, that's both a teaching question, but it's also just a social justice question, like being able to offer people who might otherwise be overwhelmed by that notion of asking a question in a discussion class.
Great, thank you.
I mean, I could speak quickly. So experiments with hearing and vision, I mean, all of these things, as an artist, I look at them as ways to create cooler tools that will work better so that the VR makes people less nauseous and stuff like that. So, I mean, I think all that work also has eventually down the road a trickle-down creative uplifting effect. So I appreciate all of these projects here today. And I think for us, we have a goal to help students in the creative writing department critically engage with AI in particular.
What's AI? Sorry.
So,
just teasing.
Well, I mean, I've got, Ray and I have colleagues, I don't know if your work was part of the original OpenAI corpus that was ripped off without, when nobody asked, right? Nobody asked permission, and all these authors just found their work used to make this tool. And it is a really cool tool, I have to admit. But at the same time, you know, people make their livelihoods based on these original ideas and IPs that they create and that they have, right? And so where is the encouragement to do that work if it's just going to be ripped off and copied? So there's a pretty serious conversation going on in creative writing about AI right now. Meanwhile, people like Ray, people like Austin, myself, Bronwyn, we really like playing with the tools, and what we like about the opportunity to play with the LLMs here at UBC is that they will be sort of sandboxed and controlled so that the work that gets created within our tool that we're building won't then go on to be ripped off. So we can't control what went into the corpus there, but we can control what happens to the work that we do. Right. And I think, so part of this is to sort of open a discussion with students in a visceral way about what it means to take part in these systems, these technological systems, and to create art within them, right? Because it's super political.
Right,
Yeah.
wow. And I really liked it. There was a provocative question about attention. And so there's something in there, I think, because I was thinking about it too, and I was thinking, like on the simplest level, what is the experience of one of your students using this VR experience versus somebody not, who's just learning about concrete poetry and procedural poetry? I mean, there seemed to be more of an embodied experience with what the students
There's
created.
so many possible approaches too.
Yeah.
You can move quick. I also have mild ADHD and want things to happen quickly in any game or space or experience that I'm doing. But there are people that really appreciate slower moving scenes and processes. So we were talking about that today, right, Ray? Yeah. Just that it's cool to create options for people and different modalities of engagement that embrace accessibility really profoundly.
Thank you. Yeah. Did you want to add anything, Ray? Or? No, I think you summed up very well. Okay. Hey, do you want to give us some poetry? No, I'm just kidding.
Maybe a rap.
Okay, speaking of rapping, wow, that was really great. Why don't I ask one more question, and then if there's questions from the audience, just raise your hand or throw something at me. But I'm okay, so I know next steps for Siobhan because you said it out loud. But with all of the projects, really, what do you feel are your next steps? Like, where do you want to go with this, with those projects that have gone through a cycle? Except for Doug and Jordan.
Well, we have one room in a fun house, but a house would naturally contain many rooms. So something that we're looking into is more possible activities that can be done in this space using the VR environment. Things like blackout poetry, if anyone's familiar with that, where you selectively erase parts of a poem or parts of a text in order to create a poem, or other potential options. So we're currently brainstorming a number of ideas, and we actually did a bit of that this morning as well.
That's great. I like that one. Sounds really good. Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because you can go in so many different directions with this. You just take the word procedural off, and then you have more of an open poetry world. TM. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, go ahead.
AI is a form of procedural poetry itself, right?
Oh.
Don't you think that AI, in a way, is a kind of procedural poem? Like really, it's a set of rules and textual interaction. I'm thinking about LLM.
Certainly, GPT defined it like that.
Yeah. It's a medium. It's a clay. Yeah. So, we like the Procedural Poetry Funhouse title because there's nothing fun about the word procedural, and so we just like the contrast. Yeah.
There was a metaphor though.
Procedures can be fun.
Imagine a garden. I love how it started like that. Siobhan, did you want to say more? Is this more? Do you think this is what you're up to? And I'm sure there's others that you might know who are up to the same type of projects. Do you think this might be a future for integrating AI in the educational space and in courses specifically?
I mean, chatbots are definitely a big thing. I really don't. I try very hard not to think about this as a chatbot because I've engaged with chatbots, and this is very different. This is poetry. It's a creative. It's as I said, an iterative process. Whereas a chatbot is kind of giving you an answer. I hope so. I hope not just for Ocelia, but also for all of the work that EML does. I hope that there's a space for that Venn diagram of overlap between teaching and research. I hope there will be more opportunities for AI to be explored, but we'll see. I remain cautiously realistic.
Nice.
I gave up optimism a long time ago.
Oh, that's great. I have a similar one, but mine is suspiciously curious. Questions? Enough talking? Yeah. Oh, question at the back. Yes. Hi.
Thank you. I'm a recent creative writing graduate, and I've heard of this project because I was a student of Austin's. I was curious about I guess you talked about like AI in the department. Of course, that is a pretty big issue for us. And the thing with AI is that it kind of overrides the author's ownership of the work. And I was wondering, how do you see the ownership of the poetry created in the Funhouse? Who owns that? Is that the writer or the player's work? Or I'm just wondering how you see that.
Well, first of all, thank you for asking such an interesting question. And that's exactly the kinds of questions that we are asking ourselves as we go forward with this process. So because the LLM that we will be utilizing is not uploading, it's not teaching a wider system, we feel comfortable that the work that's created in the experience will go no further than that experience. We are examining ideas to do with output, like whether it would be possible to somehow create something that eventually let the user take something away from the experience, like a physical output, in which case, if they sign their name to it, I think you know, maybe they'd have ownership, but it's a great question. I don't know yet. We'll have to discuss. The other thing is we're really interested in the dialogue between an AI that is, you're quite right, trying to put words in your mouth, and then you, the writer, trying to take back the power. And that interplay is what we're interested in exploring, and that's what we will be playing with in rooms like the Blackout Room, where, or there's another room that we're imagining where the AI might suggest something that's factually inaccurate or wrong, and then you will correct it. And so that by the end, you'll have a series of corrected statements that will form a poem, and you will have been prompted by the AI to do your own writing, but it will be your writing. So it's thinking about AI as a co-creator, I suppose, in some cases. Yeah, great question though, and really important.
Yeah, question at the back. I just wanted to extend that a response, or did you want to add that, Frederick? Did you have an extension of that? No. Okay. No LLM, no two LLMs are created equal. And I'm saying that because there's a flurry of them coming, and many are ethically sourced. Frederick.
All right. Hello, everyone. So this one is for the procedural poetry team. A little backstory. I remember vividly when we were doing the pre-scoping, and I was sitting in a room with 4 creative writers, and I had the audacity to ask if you wanted to implement AI into the projects. It was like walking into a minefield. But I wanted to ask, what was your opinion of AI back then, and has it changed through this process?
Well, my thoughts on AI are primarily focused on what it was trained on and whether that was, in fact, ethically sourced. So I wouldn't say that this has necessarily changed my view of AI. My concern is still whether or not we're able to find a model that was trained in an ethical way. Jen, do you have any thoughts of your own?
Well, I also think there can be creative and artistic responses that make everything transparent and clear, and then you can let users choose whether to engage with the AI or not. And as long as you make it clear what the work is, what the medium is that they're actually working with, and what's going to happen to that medium. You know, we're all adults here, and we can make our choices. And I think you can do the equivalent of putting a sign up on the front lawn that says "Hear ye, hear ye." You know, if you go any further, you're engaging with a thing called AI, and it is not a. You know, we live in a capitalist system. It's not a clean world, right? So it's not a perfect world that we inhabit. And AI is not a perfect system, but you're right when you point out that there are some really interesting ethically sourced AIs, and also that there are controls for what happens to the material that you generate with an AI. And I, for one, feel fine about that, but I'm one member of a team. So it's gently, gently, slowly, slowly in creative writing. Yeah.
Thank you. I had one last question that came from the audience through a text. They will remain anonymous. Yeah, this was just a random, I have a bot. No. EML has an emphasis on not using tech for the sake of it. For tech for the sake of using tech. So EML, yeah. So how do you use, or how do you think use of technology could benefit your students or end users? And it was targeted to Doug or Jorn.
Oh. I wonder where that came from. Yeah, no. So my project, or that project that is coming up, I think most of it is actually around safety. So I think it's quite different from most of the projects that we've seen. So wood science, I work in wood product design, where I teach some hands-on courses. And so students are actually exposed to big machines that can actually cause big damage. And so the idea is to use, and we've talked about AR the whole time. I'm really, and Frederick will love this, or we already talked about this, I'm really pushing for AR, not VR. And we're still actually, I guess that will be the first thing to figure out, can we do this or not? I do feel having students in that space where they're actually working and do these, so the idea is to train like SOP, so standard operating procedures, how to set up a machine before you actually use it. So I don't expect students wearing the AR goggles or VR goggles while cutting wood on a table saw.
What could go wrong?
We're quite there yet.
Can you describe what? No, okay.
But no. Yeah, but yeah. So again, I think the main thing is like kind of safety and also we talked about everybody learns differently, and so also self-paced, I think, is a big deal.
Nice.
So you can, and I'm fortunate, our classes are small, so I deal with maybe 25, 30 students, which is still actually like instructing a class in a shop where there's 5 machines running. It's kind of scary, and like there's a lot of responsibility. So if we could employ this as a refresher, where students can just come in and they, at some point, they grab the AR goggles or whatever it is and then just go like, oh yeah, I totally forgot how to change the saw blade. How am I going to do this again? Because again, consequences are pretty high when something is not set up properly. So
it's really good, yeah.
Safety is for sure, like that's something I feel we could really benefit from that.
Thank you, yeah, and great use case. I was once involved in a project with Microsoft, the HoloLens. And for helicopter rotor mechanics. So you can imagine, they're hard to repair in real life while they're moving. But you can do it with augmented reality. Doug, did you want to offer?
Our long-term goal is to have a tool that is easily used by researchers and clinicians. And a way that it might benefit students is that once we have a tool that people can manipulate and they can change parameters, it'll enhance their learning by able to adjust the acoustic cues that people use for sound source localization. We expect that they'll have a deeper understanding that if they can adjust the timing or the phase or the loudness or the pitch, that'll help them understand what cues people are using in their everyday sound source localization tasks. And then in addition to all of that, we're also hoping that we can have a tool that can be used by clinicians, that can be used not just in metropolitan areas where they have access to these technologies, but these can be portable. We can help decrease health inequities by sending these devices to people in rural communities, people that don't easily have access to a center like UBC where they can get those kind of services.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm getting a cue to stop. So please join me in thanking our panelists today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. That is all the time we have for the panels tonight. As a unit of UBCIT, the Emerging Media Lab is a unique vehicle that, as you have seen today, supports innovation and advances student experience through a variety of faculties and disciplines. We appreciate the support from the CIO's office, from UBCIT, from our executive producer, Saeed, and from our lab supervisor, Marianne, that has allowed us to create these amazing projects that you have seen tonight. Now, without further delay, we're going to move on to the demo session. So the demo stations are going to be in both rooms. Ocelia will be set up over there at that table to the right. Headspin will be set up over there, and then poetry, there will be 2 stations for the Poetry Funhouse project set up in the other room, in the Dodson room, which is just across the hall from us. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.